Welcome to the Intentionists podcast, where we explore the interplay between intuition, spiritual health, and everything in between. I'm your host, Amy Schreiber.
And I'm Hilary Wallen. Our intention is to create a dialogue that inspires you to consciously forge your path with curiosity and compassion for life and its mysteries. We're both really jet lagged. We should probably put that out as a disclaimer as we record this. Amy just having moved to España.
Yes.
And me coming back from the UK. So here we are.
Yes, today we are going to talk about Glastonbury, England, and all the lore and legends that surround that area, which I know nothing about, but Hilary has just been there. So I'm excited to hear what you learned on your trip.
Yeah, so we decided, we were talking about this and we thought, I haven't told you anything yet because I wanted to just tell it on the podcast. So what I've noticed is, first of all, I did this massive Instagram story where
I didn't see it. I need to go back and look at it.
My family was like, you literally logged every minute of that entire day on Instagram stories. So if anyone wants to actually see what happened there when I was there, you can go on my personal Instagram and see. I put it in my highlights. It's called Glastonbury and the handle's at Hilary Wallen. So most people are like, where is this? What is that? I've never heard of it before. And I had never really heard of it before until a few years ago. It's a really important site to both pagans and Christians. So the history of the area is that there's all these really bizarre looking, really cool hills where it's kind of, you know, if you know the English countryside, it's kind of rolling hills. It's very green and lush and beautiful and manicured farm hills kind of. But then there's these little mountains. They call them tors, or this one's called Glastonbury Tor, which I guess is a Celtic word for hill. And we're during when the ice melted from the Ice Age, all of those Neolithic mummies that they found came from this region because the water came in and the tors were little islands. They were just kind of the islands around, and all of the low land that is now just farmland was underwater. And they turned into those peat bogs. And even during Roman times, Glastonbury was actually a port city. So even in the last 2,000 years, the water receded, turned kind of into a boggy swamp type of a situation. And now it's just farmland. So that's kind of been the metamorphosis of the land. And what I don't know if you want to call them like the New Age or the Wiccans or the witches or the pagans or whatever, kind of grouped into that. There was an ancient legend that there were 7 islands around what is now modern day Glastonbury, and they mimic a star constellation. And so when the islands were there, they were in the shape of a star constellation. So it was thought to be a very sacred place for really thousands of years.
It's kind of like the hub of the New Age movement in England, right?
Well, I don't know for sure. I know that it is a hub. I don't know if it's the only one, but yes, it really felt like the general vibe when I was there it was like Coachella meets Renaissance Fair. Sorry.
Right. Well, they have the biggest music festival in Europe is there, right?
Right. So I think it's actually not in the city of Glastonbury, but they call it the Glastonbury Festival because it's nearby.
Oh, okay.
But yes, and it's a place where a lot of people pilgrim to, and it's not just the pagan and New Age people, it's Christian as well. So the Christian history starts back when it was a port city, and they say that Joseph of Arimathea, who was a big merchant, a wealthy merchant, and was also said to be a relative of Christ, like his uncle. Some say that Joseph of Arimathea was an alias and that he was actually Saint John the Beloved. Like I was reading different things about it. So there's obviously, once you get to that far back, I think, and especially with Christian history, there's a lot of debate on who was who and when and where and why. And so they say that he was a trader, a merchant, and he came up to Cornwall, and they believe that Christ actually visited Britain.
When he was like a little kid, right?
When he was a kid, that he traveled with his uncle up to Cornwall, and which is a big tin and ore trading place. Anyway, and that he came back to Glastonbury sometime, and the dates are very suspect. They say it's either like 35 AD or like 62 AD. So somewhere in that 30-year stretch after the crucifixion and resurrection that Joseph of Arimathea came up as a missionary and established the very first church in Britain. And this is where the Holy Grail, like the lore around the Holy Grail, started, was in this area. So that was really cool. So I went, they actually have what's called the Chalice Well there. And
just real quick, for people who may not be familiar with the Holy Grail, who have not watched Indiana Jones or any of that.
Or Monty Python.
Right. Or Monty Python. The Holy Grail was, like they say, it's the cup that Joseph of Arimathea walked around with, and it was Jesus's blood.
Right. When he was crucified. So the lore around the Chalice Well is that he took the Holy Grail and he buried it in the ground where he established the very first Christian church in Britain. And that this well water sprang forth, and the water ran red. And if you go to the Chalice Well, I mean, we know now with science that it wasn't because of blood or whatever, but there's a certain mineral in the ground that the water isn't actually red, but it creates that moss that's red. So you have they've set up this really beautiful Chalice Well and garden place, which you just walk in and it's just this very serene, kind of sprawling, feels like a little Zen garden. You know, there's all these little spots. It's a beautiful English garden, and they have this well, and then the spring, there's a spring that comes out that you can actually just put your water bottle up and drink. They have a spot down below where you can put your feet in the holy water, and they've created this beautiful waterfall. So they say that he buried the Holy Grail there. He established the Christian church, which is where the current, well, it's basically the ruins of the Glastonbury Abbey, which is is named for Mary. So it's they call it the Lady Church or the Lady Abbey. So there was the chalice, the Holy Grail. And then they say, because it was kind of an island, at least at one point. So they say that this is where King Arthur and Guinevere and Lancelot and everybody, that it was the Isle of Avalon, and that the actual Tor, which really is like this beautiful hill that overlooks the whole city, right, is there. So when you go to the Glastonbury Abbey, they have a little, I was kind of hoping for like an actual crypt, but it's really just like a plaque and an outline of saying this is where they found King Arthur and Guinevere's tomb in 1173, I think it was. It's like in the 1100s, and it was one of the early kings of England, Edward II or something, was there with the monk when they popped the tomb open. On the inside of the tomb, it said, "Here lies Arthur and Guinevere." And inside the tomb, there was the remains of a large man and a woman with long golden hair, and the hair was still there and not decomposed. I'm assuming the rest of the body was decomposed, but her hair was very long and golden, and it was still there, according to the account of the people that found it. So they say that they think, there's really no way to tell. They know that when you look at the history of Glastonbury Abbey, when Joseph of Arimathea started the church, it was a wooden church. And then a few hundred years later, there were some monks that built a stone retaining wall around where the wood was.
Didn't that first one get burned down? I think I was reading that.
That could be. There's no remains of the first church. There's really only remains. So then they built this little monastery. And then from there, after these remains were found of King Arthur, they ended up building this big Glastonbury Abbey, which ended up being one of the largest in all of England. It's a huge plot of land, and it's very grandiose. But then, of course, when Henry VIII came along, as we know, he's like just, I don't know, he's just a big weirdo. But he basically, took all the riches from the Abbey, and then it was destroyed and burned. And then whatever was left, the townspeople, apparently this is kind of common when the churches would be burned because they were saying no more Catholicism, now we're the Church of England. Then the local people would go and take all of the valuable stone off of the church and kind of disassemble it and take it so they could use it for like their fences or their houses or whatever. So there's not much left of the ruins there. there's just a few really pretty arches. I mean, it was beautiful grounds and everything. But anyway, it's supposed to be a very sacred place for a lot of people. And so I went there because I had heard about the Joseph of Arimathea stuff. I had also heard that it was kind of a really magical place where a lot of people that are into paganism or witchcraft, that they like to gather and go there, new age spirituality. And when I told people in England, because I was like super chatty, when I travel, I'm really chatty, I guess. And so I would just strike up conversations with people and they would be like, oh, I tell them I'm going to Glastonbury and they were like, oh, it's such a funny town. Like, you've got to go. It's great. It's such a cool experience. And my cab driver was like, oh yeah, last year on the tour, they were having there was going to be a spell off between two wizards. And he's like, I would have loved to go up there and see that happen. So there's all kinds of people that are really drawn to the area, but I feel like it's still kind of not very well known. So those were the reasons I went.
That's cool. Did you see I don't remember what it's called, but I was reading that there's a thorny tree that grew out of the staff. Allegedly, Joseph of Arimathea threw a stick down. Did you see this?
Yes. Okay. So thank you for bringing that up, because I did read about that and I totally forgot to go see it when I was there, because for multiple reasons. But yes, they say that that it's actually a tree that is there and that is growing, and they send a twig, like a leafy twig, to the queen every Christmas, and that they've done DNA testing on the tree, and that it goes, or I'm sure now it's probably like the grandchildren of the original tree, but that the DNA of the tree links back to Jerusalem, the Middle East. So they think they believe that that's where, whether he planted a sapling or he did, put a staff in and a tree sprung forth, we will never know. But there is definitely a tree there, and one that I did not go and see because, we can get into that. Yeah, I know. I was kicking myself this morning when I was reading about it, because I knew there's two springs. There's the Chalice Well and there's the White Spring. And I didn't go to the White Spring because I just didn't have time.
Okay.
And I'm assuming that the tree or something was probably near the White Spring, because there's like these certain spots that you want to make sure you go see. And on the day that I was there, I arrived and there was this huge goddess parade happening. And
so nice.
It was awesome, which, by the way, it was really fun. I have to say, have you ever gone somewhere with kind of an expectation in mind, like wanting to have a certain experience, like thinking, I'm going to have this really great spiritual experience, and then kind of being like, oh, this is turning out very differently than I originally thought?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed Glastonbury. I think ever since we talked about this on our very first episode, leaving the Mormon church, and really, I think for both of us, I mean, I know for myself for sure, that, there's still an element of like, where do I fit? Where do I belong? Like,
yeah, the whole community building and finding process is a big one.
Right. I mean, you feel that way too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I've loved reading all about kind of for multiple reasons, kind of the goddess, kind of who is this goddess, like being raised in a very patriarchal religion where there's really really, if you're raised Christian, Jewish, probably Islamic, I don't know as much about Islam, but there's not a lot of female deity. There's like maybe some speaking of like a heavenly mother, or there's a Virgin Mary, which almost gives you like a deeper complex of like, oh, you're either kind of the virgin or the whore, like either you're like the perfect virgin who you could never live up to, or, you're the woman taken in adultery. I don't know. But so I've loved reading all of just everything about goddesses. I've been really studying a lot of ancient goddesses. I've really been studying kind of the mythology around that. And I really ultimately feel like, I was talking to my husband about this last night. I'm like, I don't think there's a way for us to measure the impact of what, if you were raised religiously, of having a female deity missing from your impressionable like identity creation. How would we measure the impact of that? Like thinking in terms of a heavenly father or like a male savior, or, I mean, really not being able to see much of ourselves in a powerful, holy place. other than just needing to apologize or submit to a male god that is either loving or is spiteful, depending on how you were raised and how you were shamed or whatever. And so I've loved studying that stuff. So I wanted to go. So I get off the bus and there's this really cute elderly man that was like, "Oh, are you here for the first time?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You're lucky you came on the right day because they've been having a big goddess convention and today's the final day and they're going to do this big parade all through the town and they're going to go hike the Tor." And I was like, perfect. I was like, I totally want to hike the Tor. I would love to hike it with a bunch of goddesses. That's amazing. So, and I asked him, I'm like, "So can I just like jump in?" And he's like, "Sure." Like they don't care. They're like really open. So I walk in and there's these ladies and everybody's like dressed up, right? They're not in medieval garb, but it's like everyone's in really bright colors. There's flower crowns. Some people have capes on. There was kind of a gamut of like kind of a Coachella vibe from all the way to, like I said before, like Renaissance fair, like major Renaissance fair. There was even some kind of like Gothic looking people with the Gothic makeup, but everyone was so happy and excited. You know, it was just like a procession, you know?
All right. So they were all differentiated from the Muggles.
Definitely different. That's a good way of putting it. Exactly. So I'm like, well, I kind of want to hike up the Tor with them. And so I'm like, I should probably put on a flower crown, or at least like I was looking at I'm like, should I just go full costume? I was there by myself. I'm like, no one's going to see me or judge me. No one's going to know. Like I just could just do this. It's kind of a fun experience. And I'm all about like, I was trying to be respectful because I think everyone was very, you know, it was a fun time, but they were like serious. You know, this was like a worshipful, it was definitely a ritualistic celebration. Right. And so I was like, it was expensive to go do the whole thing. So I just got a flower crown and I was wearing my little flower crown and they're like chanting up the hill and they're going through the town and there's all these like cameras and people are taking pictures. I'm sure they were doing like an article for the newspaper or something. And I was thinking I was going up the Tor. I thought, well, I'll just walk up with all these women to the top of the Tor. So I'm like following them. And then we like go into this field that's been fenced off. And so we're like hiking up and I'm thinking, okay, well, where's this headed? This must just be the back way up the Tor. So we get up to the top of the Tor and they've got like, they're like carrying, you know, kind of dolls and things that, you know, represent the goddess. And I kind of get to the top and I'm like starting to feel like an imposter. You know, you're walking through the town and everybody's having a good time. And then I'm like, I'm sure these people are like, who's this lady? Like she hasn't been with us all week. So I'm starting to get a little self-conscious, like maybe I shouldn't do that. But everyone was very nice to me. You know, I wasn't getting any like side eyes. But then it kind of got to that place where I was like, okay, I'm not really a part of this. I think I should just bow out respectfully. And so I started trying to hike down and I realized I was like I was on what I think is the hill. It was the Chalice Hill. As I walked, I couldn't find my way down and some people were leaving. And I mean, I'm telling you, there were like the group of people, like I said, was anything from kind of like sexy girl, Coachella youngsters to like menopausal women, kind of identity crisis types to like real witches with like out of central casting, like with the long gray wiry hair. And like the one lady that I was asking where I needed to go, you know, I just said, is this how you get around to go to the Tor? And she was like, she had like a wart and like teeth missing and had the long hair. And I was just like, wow, you know, she was very friendly and nice, but it was one of those like, wow, okay, so this is definitely an experience, right? Like, so I just found myself trying not to be judgmental and celebratory but also, you know, it was a trippy experience, right? Like I find I like to be the person that's like the weirdest person of like the quote unquote normal people or the normal people, the most normal of like kind of the odd ones, but I like to hang out with all of them. Right. So, anyway, that's kind of my experience there. So then I came around and on my way up to the Tor and there was the Chalice Gardens. So I just stopped in there and had a moment. And that was really beautiful. And I dropped in, tried to meditate, and I felt like it was very vibey. You know, I felt like it was, I wasn't really feeling any like sacred vibes. I was kind of hoping to just be like, oh, this is such a holy place. And I wasn't really getting any of that. And then I went and meditated and I was like, oh yes, there's definitely a unique quality to this place. And I liked it. And then I hiked to the top of the Tor. And it got really weird. There was a goddess in there doing a ritual or a ceremony. And she didn't really creep me out. She was just doing her thing.
When you say a goddess, like one of the group of the goddess gathering?
I don't know. Yeah. See, I wanted to be careful of how I referred. I'm not sure what she was. I was calling her a goddess because she was kind of dressed like the rest of them in the goddess ceremony. She was dressed in all white and had like a little golden mask on her face and had all of her crystals and her water. And when she was doing a little ceremony. And when you get to the top of the Tor, there's a little kind of temple type place. It's just a spire with no roof on it. And it's the remains of whatever was there 1,000 years ago or 800 years ago. And she was just doing her little ceremony. And there were several people that had walked in and they were like sitting in there with her. But it was odd because there were lots of different people up there. There were like people that were just trying to get a good exercise and like hiking a mountain, and people with their families. And then there were like pilgrim type people. And so you kind of walked in and it was like, what's going on here? You know, it was an interesting energy of like, some people being like, this is weird. And other people being like, yes, oh, she's doing a ceremony. I should jump in and experience it, you know? And she was fine. She was just kind of in her zone, you know, then she was done with her ritual and she just kind of stood there for like the entire time I was there, which was like a half an hour, just kind of with her eyes closed and her face like in the sun through this window inside the temple, you know, which was just like, okay, cool. Yeah, she's doing her thing. But there was this guy there who was really weird. And he just felt like he was putting on a show, and he would like shake up this can and then he would open it up and he would like make all these noises. And I just was like, are you on drugs? But I didn't think he was on drugs. Anyway, I left just being like, ugh, like I felt, you know, when you leave situations and you feel almost like you need to take a shower, where it was like what you're looking at is kind of the extreme version of what you're into. Does that make sense? Like I'm thinking I love doing, you know, manifesting and having my crystals out and like doing my little at-home rituals and having like my spiritual practice that involves meditation or whatever.
It just wasn't your brand of public ritual.
Yeah. Like seeing it done in that way was just almost like confronting, you know, like,
well, probably because you've never done it. You've never done things like that in public places. Like since being inside the Mormon church, we do our public, I mean, not public, but rituals within the church, within the temple and stuff. But like to be somewhere else where it's stuff that you're like, oh yeah, I'm into this. But then you see it, that would be confronting because you're like, wait, am I really into this?
Totally. That's kind of how I felt. I was like, I love the concept of female deity. I love the concept of women's empowerment. I love the concept of people being expressed about what they believe in. I love the idea of women gathering in a powerful way. Like I'm all about all of that. And then being in it, I was just like, oh, I don't know. Like I'm not sure how all this works for me. You know, like it was just, I don't know. It's just one of those observances of like, you know, I was really trying to hold space of the space of non-judgment, which is kind of why I didn't really have any beef with the actual, I'm calling her the goddess, but it was this dude that was kind of like, he was just a little more in your face. And I was like, what is his angle? Like, does he want me to tip him? Is he just here because he feels like he's called to do that? Like, what is going on? It was just one of those, like, what is happening right now? I don't know. And obviously I was alone, which for the most part was great, but I was kind of like wanting to process that. I'm like, I'm alone. So I guess I'll just, you know, leave it there on the shelf for a while.
That's interesting. I think the different ways that people want to like celebrate their beliefs, especially if it's not in a formalized religion, like those are just ways that, you know, you're told what to do and how to do this ritual and how to celebrate. But like in the more free flowing new agey type spiritualities or more like the neo-pagan based stuff, it's a lot more open, you know, for everyone's own interpretation. So like you can do with it whatever you want, you know, like-minded people are going to group together and do that stuff, and those just didn't happen to be your people that you would have done that stuff with, you know?
Yeah, it was really interesting because, I mean, just for all those reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also I came in having an expectation. And so I felt like the Goddess Procession was cool. It was a fun cultural experience. I was just kind of, I was like, I think part of it was I was an observer and also a little bit of a participant. And then I realized I was like, really, it's not my place to participate in this. I think I just need to be observing it and letting it be what it is. And then I went up to the tour and it was kind of like this bizarre, interactive, like stuff where I would normally be like, oh, cool, she's doing a ritual. Oh my gosh, I'd love to like hold space for her, whatever that means. And then I was just like, this is actually, I feel more comfortable sitting on the side of the hill with the people that are just like chilling and looking at the view and just kind of like having a moment by myself, I think. You know, it was just interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, there has, for me, always been something about like public displays of alleged spirituality that like turns me off.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was.
I mean, everyone's like raised different, but like, and thinks certain things are normal and not to do in public. But
right. So it was just weird. I think it was one of those like when you're dabbling, we're trying to like find your own spiritual path and you're like dabbling in stuff that feels really good and really cool when you're by yourself. And then you see it done publicly and you're like, this is just, I don't know. Maybe I don't like any of this. Maybe this isn't even like, how is this any different from where I was before? Like maybe none of it's good. You know, it just kind of brings you back to that whole like, blah, you know?
Well, yeah, no, I totally get that. In the tiny bit that I did read about Glastonbury and history surrounding the legends of the Holy Grail and stuff, one man was writing like that pilgrimage sites was like huge business for churches back in the day.
Exactly.
So any little relic that they could establish in a place was big money.
Right.
Which taints it a bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think, but there's also part of me that goes like, my belief, what I feel like I'm coming to in terms of quote unquote sacred spaces is that it's sacred because we say it's sacred. And so because there's been thousands of people with their hopeful energy making an energetic pattern on the way to these places, that it is a sacred place, that because that intention, and if you're talking about manifesting or anything like that, it's like because there's been this group, this collective energy saying, we're going to call this place holy and sacred, that it becomes that. But it does get weird. Like when you're watching, I think that's part of it. Just maybe it's just weird that like spirituality is such a personal thing that to see it done in a way that's foreign to you is confronting, no matter what your religion is, no matter what your spiritual belief is, you know? Like I was thinking, what if this was like a Hindu procession or a Buddhist procession? Would I have the same judgment? Would I
don't think you would have felt the same. Yeah, I think that was surprisingly confronting to you because it was something you felt like you were familiar with, but
clearly I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, like in that way, at least.
Right.
That's really interesting that you had that reaction to seeing that. Like,
I know, I was surprised too. I wasn't expecting that because I have just spent like months and months reading about different goddesses and goddess energy and Mother Earth and just trying to connect to that divine feminine. And so it was different doing that. So then I went down into town. The Goddess Procession was kind of leaving the Chalice Hill the same time I was coming down the tour. So there was a lady and she was from Oregon and I talked to her for a minute and she was like, you got to go to the Goddess Temple. And I said, oh, is that the Glastonbury Abbey? And she's like, no, it's like a goddess temple and it's in town. So I spent the next hour or two going in all the fun bookshops and I loved it. That part of it was really fun because there were just so many books that you would never see at any other type of a bookstore. And a lot of books that were out of print. So old books about astral projection or witchcraft or Sophia Divine. And, you know, I bought a bunch of books and hauled them all around Europe, you know, for a week because I was like, I'm never going to be able to find these, you know, the cult of the Black Virgin, you know, just stuff that is interesting where you're like, what's that all about? That's interesting.
Right.
And I think coming from a religious tradition that was so like, you know, only read this type of stuff, I've really enjoyed. I mean, I read with a critical eye, but I really enjoy reading all of it. Like what do they believe? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, these witch trials here, those witch trials there. So there's a little community. There's like a little, right in downtown Glastonbury, there's just like this little shop where they have kind of a shop where you can buy all the herbs and oils and crystals and, you know, incense and everything for rituals or potions or personal magic, whatever you want to do. And up above is the goddess temple. And so I was like, great, I'll go to the goddess temple, which was more like, it felt kind of like a yoga studio. It was about the size of a yoga studio, just a small space. And that was really cool because it was very quiet. There were other people in there, but it was a designated space for your own, you know, personal practice. And I think maybe that's part of it, is like having the designated space for the sacred work is really important. So I walked in and it was different, you know, it was different than anything else I'd been to. It had all these beautiful pictures of goddesses and candles lit, just like you would go into a Catholic church or a big church and light a candle for a prayer. And
could you take pictures? Did you take pictures?
No, they wouldn't let you take pictures inside, but I did get a candle there, and they have what they call a Melissa, which I guess is a temple matron, a goddess temple matron. And she sages you when you come in, and you can sit and meditate. You can light a candle. Then they had this area where it was almost like a setup of women standing in a circle. They weren't, but it was like wicker statues of women in a circle, and you could go lay in the circle. And it was just beautiful. I just thought it was really beautiful. I think what was different about it was that it was a designated sacred space. And I think that was my kind of the distinction of whatever it is that they're doing, whatever practice you want to participate in, that it wasn't just thrown out there cavalierly, I guess.
There weren't like tourists walking around. It was like a cozy private space.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I just spent maybe 15 minutes in there, and I don't even remember what I was thinking about, but I remember being moved to tears in there, just feeling like it just brought up, like, you know, things bubbling, but feeling like it was good. You know, it felt like, oh, this is this beautiful sacred experience. So then like I said, I broke my suitcase on cobblestones, so I had to leave. And
because of all the books that you got, probably.
Yes. Books and yes, exactly. So I had to go find a suitcase, which took the second half of the day. And then I went up to Bath. And what was interesting was where I really had when I was, you know, you're kind of just experiencing the day, and you're kind of like, you know how sometimes it takes a few days to process an experience like that?
Yes.
So I had to ride like an hour and a half bus up to Bath. And I get there and I check into my hotel, and the guy's like, I'm like, what do I do on a Sunday? And he's like, everything's closed. So you could just walk around and, like, you know, sit in the park and watch the sunset or whatever, get some ice cream. And I was like, okay. So I wandered around, and the Bath Abbey is this big, old, beautiful abbey that's been there for 800 years or more. And it was playing the bells. The bells were going crazy. They were just chiming for like an hour. It was so beautiful all through the city. Oh, and nice. So I sat there and I was like, you know what, maybe I'll just go see if I can go into the church. Kind of, you know, when you travel, you don't really realize what day it was. It's like, oh yeah, I guess it's a Sunday. I wasn't really thinking. So I walked up to the Bath Abbey, and they were like, oh, we're not letting tourists in, but we are having a service. It's just starting if you want to join. And I was like, sure, why not? So I go into the Bath Abbey, and I'm assuming it's a Church of England, you know, like an Anglican church. And I sat down in the pew, and I mean, you're in this beautiful building with this beautiful stained glass and this person playing the piano that's just echoing off all of the walls. And I mean, it was just beautiful. And then this woman gets up who's like 65. It's like beautiful 65-year-old woman. And she's the one doing the sermon. And she opens up with the importance of Christian meditation. And I literally, I like started to cry. I was like, oh my gosh, you know, it was just this like total full circle moment. And I felt like I sat in that service for like a half an hour. And what I realized is I was like, it was just so nice to hear a sermon from a woman in a place that was a little more familiar to me because of my own Christian upbringing. I realized for me, it's about being in an inspirational space. Like the lesson for me, I think, throughout the day was the importance of being in an inspired space. And I was just in the walls of this incredible abbey, and I was just feeling it. You know, I was like, yeah. And I walked up to her at the end. I lit a little candle, and I, you know, put some pounds or whatever in the slot or whatever. And I walked up to her and I said, I've really enjoyed all the things you had to say. Like, she gave this great sermon that was very inclusive and open and progressive. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I was around, I would go there and yoga and the Goddess Temple. Like, I would do all of it. Right. And I literally started I almost burst into tears. I had to I was like, thank you for your sermon. And I had to leave. And I was like, what is happening? Like, what is going on? Like, when you can't really tell. Anyway, so as I was processing that, I just felt like it felt like a very full circle moment. It felt like the importance of having the male deity and the female deity and both genders, both sexes involved in the rituals and the rites. It's like none of it's true. All of it's true. It was one of those days where I felt like I wasn't expecting to get what I needed from the day, but I think I needed the entire day. I don't know that experience in the Bath Abbey would have been that way for me had I not been a part of the Goddess Procession in the morning,
Yeah, totally. And you found that it comes in places that you're not expecting. All these things, all these high hopes for whatever meditation session you enter, whatever yoga class or goddess march, whatever is going on, you're not in control of any of that. It just happens when it's going to happen, whether you're in some temple somewhere or on the toilet, it's random.
Absolutely. Great point. No, I think that's true. I was not expecting it. I was more or less wanting to just go in the church because I love I think what speaks to me more than anything is architecture. I love art and paintings and sculpture and all that. But I think what really gets me is architecture, walking into spaces that have been designed and the geometry and the
so much time put into many hours of
and so many of them are you don't know architects, right? Like you don't
know. It's like Frank Lloyd Wright. Who else do we know? I don't know.
Exactly. It's kind of like what an offering and a kind of an anonymous act in so many ways, because so many of the most beautiful buildings took centuries to build. So it wasn't just one person. It was such a collective effort. So I feel like there is that energy whenever you go into a place that is deemed sacred, whether it's your religion or someone else's religion or something completely different. And obviously you can find all the horrific things that have happened in religious institutions too. But I choose to go in with the idea of this was designated as a place of worship. And it's a really beautiful experience to sit in a beautiful space and allow whatever's coming up to come up.
Yeah, and that's a totally personal thing because some people hate that idea and are like, no, I'm going to sit in the forest and that's where I feel that. And so it's just about exploring around and figuring out what speaks to you. And it's going to be different throughout your life too. It's not a static thing.
Yeah, I mean, to that end, I think, just hiking the top of the Tor, I thought I'd want to be in the little temple. And because of what was going on in the little temple, I was like, I really was just enjoying being on the top of the mountain and just enjoying the view and all of that. And of course, I mean, nature and the spaces that are produced naturally are, for me, you're right, the most sacred, right?
No, I'm not saying they're the most. I'm just saying for some people and at some times, it's just about finding what that is for you and being open to whatever is happening at any moment.
Yes.
All the inspiration can come at any time.
Yes. So I would highly recommend if you are a lover of religious history, I think it's definitely worth a trip. And if you're open to just having an experience, I loved it. I'm so glad I went. Now I look back on it, 5 or 6 days later, 7 days later, and I'm like, oh man, I'm so glad I had that experience. It feels really fun and light and happy. And I find that sometimes you need those things where you can kind of close your eyes and go back to that place and be like, oh, remember when the sun was shining? It was just such a warm, beautiful day. And it was such a fun, joyous experience. And I think having it alone, I've never done a trip totally alone. And
that sounds amazing.
It was incredible.
Like a dream.
Oh my gosh. And granted, I would have loved to have had a girlfriend with me in Glastonbury. I mean, most of the time I was like, where is someone to come and wear a flower crown with me and hold my hand? And this would be so fun. But I think now that I'm a mother and it was just, I really relished that alone time. And it was very confidence building to be like, yeah, I'm just going to do this alone. I'm going back to my hotel room. It's quiet. I can do whatever I want.
Oh yeah. That sounds amazing.
It was great. I know. So now I need to come visit you in your new land, Aimee.
I know you do need to. Yeah, you would go crazy here if architecture is your thing.
Oh gosh.
It's so crazy. So
yes. And I think we should do an episode about your travels, and just so our listeners know, where are you located now, Aimee?
Now I am located in Valencia, Spain, and I will be here for the next 3 months at least. So
I want to do an episode soon talking about that process, because I think a lot of people are interested in how does this stuff happen and what's it like to, you've been through a lot of big cultural shifts going from Modesto to the Northwest to Mexico and now to Spain.
Yeah, we'll do one about that soon. But yeah, thanks for sharing all your Glastonbury stuff. That was cool and interesting.
Before we part, we'd like to say thanks for listening, and we hope you'll connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We would love to hear from you and appreciate all feedback, shares, and likes.
To learn more and subscribe to our newsletter, visit Intentionists.com. And no matter where you are or what you're creating, we send you love and invite you to breathe and begin.
See you next week.